I think it's been exactly 3 minutes. It's a bit of an oxymoron, I think, to have a poet talk about exactly. But I'm Bud Peterson. I'm the president here at Georgia Tech, and it's a real pleasure to be able to welcome all of you here to poetry at Tech. We're in for a delightful experience tonight. We have the renowned Billy Collins, former poet laureate, who will help us to celebrate the life and works of Dr. Henry C. Bourne, Jr. As I travel around and speak about Georgia Tech, one of the things that I do frequently is to try to convey that Georgia Tech is about much more than just engineering. And one of the things that I often say is to talk about things that would surprise you about Georgia Tech or surprise people about Georgia Tech. And among those is that in the country there are about 24 or so endowed chairs in poetry. And here at Georgia Tech we're honored to have two of those endowed chairs, as members of our faculty, the Henry Bourne Chair and the McEverett Chair. It's a remarkable accomplishment, a remarkable achievement for any institution, but particularly for an institution like Georgia Tech. So again, welcome, and at this point I'd like to introduce Mr. Bruce McEverett.
Thank you and welcome. I'm honored to be speaking tonight and here in honor of Dr. Bourne. Thank you, Dr. Peterson, for that introduction. We're so glad that you and Val are here and appreciate poetry. Tom not only starts meetings on time, but he was very specific about I can say about him. So I want to read this so I get it right right here. Tom Lux has published 11 books of poetry and has 2 books forthcoming. One called A Child Made of Sand from Hood and Mifflin in 2012 and a nonfiction book scheduled to appear in 2012 as well. That's probably from San Diego, right, Tom? Yep. Your experiences out there. He was a Guggenheim Fellow and a Kingsley Tufts Award winner. But now for my personal remarks. A haircut? No, I don't know. I'm not going to say that. What you need to know about Tom is he's my friend and teacher and one of the most generous people on earth. Excuse me. He's a real poetry saint. And he's not only a great poet, he lives and breathes his craft and reads more than any person I know. His poetry circle is wide and talented. His poetry friends are all very appreciative of the help and breaks that he has provided them, and me included. He published my first book of poems that wouldn't have been pulled together if he hadn't encouraged me. Tom shares his love of poetry, and we are all beneficiaries of that. And here tonight is just a prime example. I really believe that all people are poets at heart, and Tom is someone who can turn that into a reality. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Bruce, Dr. Peterson. This is obviously a very special reading. Billy Collins is back. This is his 3rd time reading for poetry at Tech, and another time just a few years ago when Dr. Clough was our president, he brought him to read and speak to a whole gang of college administrators, deans, presidents, etc. Where normally you would have invited a CEO or something, maybe a scientist or something. He invited Billy. What he was thinking, I don't know. I said at our little dinner, our tribute to Dr. Bourne earlier, that it's a great privilege and a responsibility for me to hold this position, the Bourne Chair in poetry. And the way I've tried to honor that, the way we have tried to honor that, is by sharing these gifts, by trying to teach our hearts out for Georgia Tech students, first of all, but we also share these gifts with the university, with the community, with Atlanta, Georgia. We have free poetry workshops, free these readings, of course. We send poets into schools. If you're a teacher and you want a poet to visit your school, we will arrange that for free. I'm going to introduce Billy now, and if you hold your seats for like 1 minute after Billy's finished reading so I can thank some people who need to be thanked, I'd appreciate that. As you all know, Billy Collins is the former Poet Laureate of the United States. I think he kind of defined that position. It was during his tenure that position became very important and had a national, the attention of the nation. And that's important for poetry. His most recent book is called Ballistics. He has a new book coming out shortly, Horoscopes for the Dead, in March. There's a selected poem, Sailing Around the Room. Books are for sale afterwards, and Billy will be signing them. As most of you know, he's an incredibly popular poet, best-selling poet, but he's also one of our very best poets. It's a lot harder to write clearly and precisely and succinctly than it is to write obscurely. It's a lot harder to do that. And to still have something to say, and to say it with music and passion and with originality, is even rarer. I remember Stephen Dobbins, a poet who once held a McEver chair here, saying to me, holding one of Billy's books, Pictic Lightning, I think it was, and just saying excitedly, there's not a word out of place in this book. There's not a word out of place. When one poet praises another poet like that, you got to take that seriously. But I've loved his poems for a long, long time. I do have to eat a little crow here. Billy and I have a yearly wager on baseball. Billy's a Yankee fan. He can't help it. He was born and bred there. He can't help it. It's the only flaw that I know he has. But he was born and bred there, so it's okay. I am, of course, a Red Sox fan. So every year we make a little wager on who comes ahead in American League East this year. In fact, for the last 2 years, I think maybe 3, Mr. Collins has won. So I'm going to leave your check on the podium. And if you want to gloat a little, that would be your privilege. Please welcome again to Georgia Tech, Billy Collins.
Didn't realize we've got so much. That's great. I'm not getting it back. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Dr. Peterson and Bruce McEver, and all these introducers. And it's a privilege to be part of the this occasion to honor Henry Bourne, and we had a little dinner to do that. And I just think he's such a visionary to try to bring poetry and electrical engineering on the same table, or in the same under the same roof of the university. But I was thinking, the Georgia Tech, of course, stands for Georgia Institute of Technology, but it also now, I think after Tom's been here for 8 years, can also mean Georgia Institute for Poetical Technique. So you use tech in those two senses there. So it's a privilege to be part of that. At dinner, I was talking to one of Dr. Bourne's daughters, and she mentioned that he was a great communicator and believed heavily in not just in knowledge but in communicating. And I'm going to start by reading a poem which attempts to communicate rather directly to the reader. And poets are people who, well, we all talk to ourselves. Poets are different because they actually listen to what they're saying when they're talking to themselves. Most of us don't pay much attention to that. But not only that, poets take it a step further and think that maybe other people would be interested in listening to me talking about myself. So, but I want to make sure that I do have a reader. Writing poetry is a very solitary activity, and I like the company of a reader. I think of the reader as kind of a sort of a mature version of my guardian angel who really likes poetry. And so this is addressed directly to that figure, and it's called You Reader. I wonder how you are going to find out I wonder how you are going to feel when you find out that I wrote this instead of you. That it was I who got up early to sit in the kitchen and mention with a pen the rain-soaked windows, the ivy wallpaper, and the goldfish circling in its bowl. Go ahead, turn aside, bite your lip, and tear out the page, but listen, it was just a matter of time before one of us happened to notice the unlit candles and the clock humming on the wall. Plus, nothing happened that morning. A song on the radio, a car whistling along the road outside. And I was only thinking about the shakers of salt and pepper that were standing side by side on a placemat. I wondered if they had become friends after all these years, or if they were still strangers to one another, like you and I, who managed to be known and unknown to each other at the same time. Me at this table with a bowl of pears, you leaning in a doorway somewhere near some blue hydrangeas reading this. I'm going to put this check in my pocket so I stop looking at it. Very distracting. I'm going to read, Tom mentioned this forthcoming book, and someone, I think William Matthews, pointed out that every author's favorite word in the English language is forthcoming. So I'll read a few poems from that. And this is just called Grave. What do you think of my new glasses? I asked as I stood under a shade tree before the joined grave of my parents. And what followed was a long silence that descended on the rows of the dead and on the fields and the woods beyond, one of the 100 kinds of silence, according to the Chinese belief, each one distinct from the others, but the differences being so faint that only a few special monks were able to tell them all apart. They make you look very scholarly, I heard my mother say, once I lay down on the ground and pressed an ear into the soft grass. Then I rolled over and pressed my other ear to the ground, the ear my father likes to speak into, but he would say nothing, and I could not find a silence among the 100 Chinese silences that would fit the one that he created, even though I was the one who had just made up the business of the 100 Chinese silences, the silence of the night boat, and the silence of the lotus, cousin to the silence of the temple bell, only deeper and softer, like petals at its farthest edges. My father was in the habit of tricking me a lot and then fooling me by telling me these wild tales, so I thought I'd get back at him. Better late than never. And read a poem about a trip I took to Italy, to Sicily actually. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was late August, which is not a good time to be in Sicily. The heat is 40, 41 degrees Celsius, and I know so many mathematical types here. Just add 32 and divide by 5/6, and you realize it's incredibly hot. Is the conclusion of that little arithmetic. It was a kind of, for me, really a mind-warping kind of heat. And the resulting poem is called Palermo. It was foolish of us to leave our rooms. The empty plaza was shimmering, the clock looked ready to melt. The heat was a mallet striking a ball and sending it bouncing into the nettles of summer. Even the bees had knocked off for the day. The only thing moving besides us, and we had since stopped under an awning, was a squirrel who was darting this way and that, as if he were having second thoughts about crossing the street, his head and tail twitching with indecision. You were looking in a shop window, but I was watching the squirrel, who now rose up on his hind legs, and after pausing to look in all directions, began to sing in a beautiful voice a melancholy aria about life and death, his forepaws clutched against his chest, his face full of longing and hope, as the sun beat down on the roofs and awnings of the city, and the earth continued to turn and hold in position the moon, which would appear later that night as we sat in a cafe, and I stood up on the table with the encouragement of the owner and sang for you and the others the song the squirrel had taught me how to sing. Thank you. I always think, it's the best way to lead people into mystery is through clear language. So, but I'm not sure what's happening at the end of that poem, and I shouldn't. Nor should you. I was going to call this next poem Simile, but that didn't make it clear what should be clear, which is that the poem is not spoken in my voice or even the voice of my persona. It's spoken by a young female. And so it was retitled What She Said. What She Said. When he told me he expected me to pay for dinner, I was like, give me a break. I was not the exact equivalent of give me a break. I was just similar to give me a break. As I said, I was like, give me a break. I would love to tell you how I was able to resemble give me a break without actually being identical to give me a break. But all I can say is that I sensed a similarity between me and give me a break. And that was close enough at that point in the evening, even if it meant I would fall short of standing up from the table and screaming, give me a break, for God's sake, will you please give me a break? No, for that moment, with the rain streaking the restaurant windows and the waiter approaching, I felt the most I could be was like, to a certain degree, give me a break. Here's sort of the I guess junior sibling of that poem. It's a much shorter poem, but it addresses, you might say, a kind of speech tic or a kind of reflexive colloquialism that is infected, and I mean infected, the language. And the title of the poem is "Oh My God." One thing I wanted to point out is that after I wrote this poem, only verbs are supposed to have tenses, but I realized that the expression "oh my God" has a past tense. The past tense of "oh my God" is "I was like oh my God." So here's, it's just 9 lines long, and you'll see that the speaker is a pretty naive guy. Oh my God. Not only in church and nightly by their bedsides do young girls pray these days. Wherever they go, prayer is woven into their talk, like a bright thread of awe. Even at the pedestrian mall, outbursts of praise spring unbidden from their glossy lips. Thank you very much. There's a poem called Roses. Roses. In those weeks of midsummer, when the roses in gardens begin to give up, the big red, white, and pink ones, the inner enfolded petals growing cankerous, the ones at the edges turning brown or fallen already down on their girlish backs in the rough beds of turned-over soil, then how terrible the expression on their faces, a kind of was it all really worth it look, to die here, slowly, in front of everyone, in the garden of a bed and breakfast in a provincial English market town, to expire by degrees of corruption, in plain sight of all the neighbors passing by, the thin mail carrier, the stocky butcher, thank God the children pay no attention, the swiveling faces in the windows of the buses, and now this stranger staring over the wall, his hair disheveled, a scarf loose around his neck, writing in a notebook, writing about us, no doubt, about how terrible we look under the punishing sun. Tom mentioned this forthcoming book, and we'll read the title poem, Horoscopes for the Dead. I think this came about when when I come across a horoscope in a newspaper. I think I'm like everybody else. I read mine first, and then I'm an only child, so I don't stop there. I read the horoscopes of others. So you read the horoscope of a loved one, perhaps, or a friend, and I realized at some point after a friend of mine had died that I continued to read his horoscope. So horoscopes for the dead. Every morning since you disappeared for good, I read about you in the daily paper, along with the box scores, the weather, and the bad news. Some days I am reminded that today will not be a wildly romantic time for you, nor will you be challenged by educational goals, nor will you need to be circumspect at the workplace. Another day I learned that you should not miss an opportunity to travel and make new friends, though you never cared much about either. I cannot imagine you ever facing a new problem with a positive attitude, but you will definitely not be doing that or anything like that on this weekday in March. And the same goes for the fun you might have gotten from group activities, a likelihood attributed to everyone under your sign. A dramatic rise in income may be a reason to treat yourself, but that would apply more to all the Pisces who are still alive, still swimming up and down the stream of life, or suspended in a pool in the shade of an overhanging tree. But you will be relieved to learn that you no longer need to reflect carefully before acting, nor do you have to think more of others, and never again will creative work take a back seat to the business responsibilities that you never really had. And don't worry today, or any day, about problems caused by your unwillingness to interact rationally with your associates. No more goals for you, no more romance, no more money or children, jobs or important tasks. But then again, you are never thus encumbered. So leave it up to me now to plan carefully for success and the wealth it may bring, to value the dear ones close to my heart, and to welcome any intellectual stimulation that comes my way, though that sounds like a lot to get done on a Tuesday. I am better off closing the newspaper, putting on the same clothes I wore yesterday when I read that your financial prospects were looking up, than pushing off on my bicycle and pedaling along the shore road by the bay. And you stay just where you are, lying there in your beautiful blue suit, your hands crossed on your chest, like the wings of a bird who has flown in its strange migration, not north or south, but straight up from Earth, and pierced the enormous zodiac. This is one of those poems, it's only 5 lines long, but believe it or not, it's based, it pretty much happened the way I describe it here. Very little invention. It's called Feedback. The woman who wrote from Phoenix, after my reading there, to tell me they were all still talking about it, just wrote again to tell me that they had stopped. You wonder how intentional that is, and how sadistic it is. And here's a newer poem. It's called it's written after a recent visit to the interior of the country, and it's called The Sandhill Cranes of Nebraska. "Too bad you weren't here 6 months ago," was a lament I heard on my visit to Nebraska. "You could have seen the astonishing spectacle of the sandhill cranes, thousands of them feeding and even dancing on the shores of the Platte River." There was no point in pointing out the impossibility of my being there then, because I happened to be somewhere else, so I nodded and put on a little look of disappointment, if only to be part of the commiseration. It was the same look I remember wearing about 6 months ago in Georgia, when I was told that I had just missed the spectacular annual outburst of azaleas, brilliant against the green backdrop of spring. And the same in Vermont 6 months before that, when I arrived shortly after the magnificent foliage had gloriously peaked, Mother Nature, as she is called, having touched the hills with her many-colored brush. A phenomenon that occurs, like the others, around the same time every year, when I am apparently off in another state, stuck in a motel lobby with the local paper and a styrofoam cup of coffee, busily missing God knows what. Thank you. Well, you're such a good audience, and hello to my invisible audience up there above us, looking down like guardian angels themselves. Let me read a couple of poems that are kind of about the business of writing poetry, although it's not much of a business. But I like that comment by who's the American humorist? I'm blocking his name now. Who said that Max Beerbohm, who said that the most difficult thing about being a poet was figuring out to do it the remaining 23 and a half hours of the day. And this, he was sort of a professional dawdler and very against industry and self-improvement. And he became a great commencement speaker. And he also said at some point, he said, "The ant sets an example for us all, but it is not a good one." So this poem might have been inspired by him. And it's called Monday. Monday. The birds are in their trees, the toast is in the toaster, and the poets are at their windows. They are at their windows in every section of the tangerine of earth, the Chinese poets looking up at the moon, the American poets gazing out at the pink and blue ribbons of sunrise. The clerks are at their desks, the miners are down in their mines, and the poets are looking out their windows, maybe with a cigarette, a cup of tea, and maybe a flannel shirt or a bathrobe is involved. The proofreaders are playing the ping-pong game of proofreading, glancing back and forth from page to page. The chefs are dicing celery and potatoes, and the poets are at their windows because it is their job, for which they are paid nothing every Friday afternoon. Which window, it hardly seems to matter, though many have a favorite, for there is always something to see, a bird grasping a thin branch, the headlights of a taxi rounding a corner, those two boys in wool caps angling across the street. The fishermen bob in their boats, the linemen climb their round poles, the barbers wait by their mirrors and chairs, and the poets continue to stare at the cracked bird bath or a limb knocked down by the wind. By now it should go without saying that what the oven is to the baker and the berry-stained blouse to the dry cleaner, so the window is to the poet. Just think, before the invention of the window, the poets would have to put on a jacket and a winter hat to go outside, or remain indoors with only a wall to stare at. And when I say a wall, I do not mean a wall with striped wallpaper and a sketch of a cow in a frame. I mean a cold wall of fieldstones, the wall of the medieval sonnet, the original woman's heart of stone, the stone caught in the throat of her poet lover. This next poem is also, well, it's, we are in a community of poets. We all love each other. Not. No, we try to make each other jealous because that's how we inspire people. I mean, that's, all writing or all artistic endeavor, maybe all human endeavor, I think, is motivated by jealousy. Certainly in literature. Professors want to call this literary influence, but it's actually envy, like the way I envy Tom, for example. We have a mutual envy society, maybe. Anyway, this is a poem based on a photograph by a photographer you might know. He did the cover to this book, a picture of a bullet going through the Queen of Hearts. Notice not the Three of Clubs. You want to make it as emotional as possible. He was a science photographer, taught at MIT for many years, and brought together, he's from Nebraska actually, brought together high-speed photography with strobe lighting. And the result was something he called stroboscopic photography, which revealed to us in a whole number of phenomena that took place in moments of often violent collision that happened too fast for the eye to see, Harold Edgerton. His probably most famous photograph is a photograph of a drop of milk landing in a pan of milk. And it forms, this happens every morning at breakfast probably to us, but we can't see what's going on. And what happens is that a perfect little corona of droplets, about a dozen of them, form in the air. So although his motivations were scientific, he revealed in these little nano moments an amazing aesthetic of violence, gentle violence in the case of the drop of milk, but more obvious violence in the case of footballs being kicked and things being shot. He liked to shoot things. And the poem is called, it's based on one of his photographs, it's called Ballistics. When I came across the high-speed photograph of a bullet that had just pierced a book, the pages exploding with the velocity, I forgot all about the marvels of photography and began to wonder which book the photographer had selected for the shot. Many novels sprang to mind, including those of Raymond Chandler, where an extra bullet would hardly be noticed. Nonfiction offered too many choices, a history of Scottish lighthouses, a biography of Joan of Arc, and so forth. Or it could be an anthology of medieval literature, the bullet having just beheaded Sir Gawain and scattered the band of assorted pilgrims. But later, as I was drifting off to sleep, I realized that the executed book was a recent collection of poems written by someone of whom I was not fond, and that the bullet must have passed through his writing with little resistance. At 2,800 feet per second, through the poems about his sorry childhood, the ones about the dreary state of the world, and then through the author's photograph, through the beard, the round glasses, and that special poet's hat he loves to wear. Not sure who that is. Here's a little poem called Adage, which is a kind of poem that likes to play around with some adages, with some maxims. Adage. When it's late at night and branches are banging against the windows, you might think that love is just a matter of leaping out of the frying pan of yourself into the fire of someone else. But it's a little more complicated than that. It's more like trading the two birds who might be hiding in that bush for the one you are not holding in your hand. A wise man once said that love was like forcing a horse to drink, but then everyone stopped thinking of him as wise. let us be clear about something. Love is not as simple as getting up on the wrong side of the bed wearing the emperor's clothes. No, it's more like the way the pen feels after it has defeated the sword. It's a little like the penny saved or the 9 dropped stitches. You look at me through the halo of the last candle and tell me that love is an ill wind that has no turning, a road that blows no good. But I am here to remind you, as our shadows tremble on the walls, that love is the early bird who is better late than never. I'll read a couple of very short poems. This is, and I'll, as I usually say in a reading, I'll tell you if they're really short because there are certain obvious benefits of attending a poetry reading. The magic, the magic in the air, that stuff. But one of the drawbacks is that you can't tell where the poem is going to end. And when we usually have a literary experience involving a text, we can see the ending coming up and we can get ready. We can get emotionally set, for them. So this is 4 lines long, and it's the kind of poem that depends entirely for its meaning on its title. There's no literary term for that, but we should make one up. One of the great ones is W.S. Merwin has, I think, the best one-line poem ever written, and it's called, the title is Elegy, and the poem is, Who Would I Show It To? Yeah, right. And not quite as moving is Howard Nemiroff's poem called Bacon and Eggs. Bacon and eggs. The chicken contributes, but the pig gives his all. He was poet laureate. Anyway, so this is just 4 lines long, and the title is Divorce. Once, 2 spoons in bed. Now, tined forks across a granite table, and the knives they have hired. That's great. That poem always gets that reaction. And this is, 12 lines long. It's spoken spoken by a dog. You can imagine it was actually written by a dog. And the dog is thinking about his position in life relative to his master. It's titled A Dog on His Master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7 to 1 is the ratio, they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. I sometimes tell students, Tom knows that advice conveyed to young writers is a tricky business. You never know what exactly is right to say, but sometimes I say, if you're stuck in a poem, just have a dog come in. It will get you over your self-absorption for a few lines, and dogs tend to cheer things up by their presence. So I'll read at least one other official dog poem. This is just a poem dedicated to my dog, and it's called Dharma. And Dharma because, not the dog's name, the dog's name was Janine, which is probably on the opposite end of the vocabulary from Dharma, and not as deep perhaps. Apologies to all the deep Janines in the audience, but it's called Dharma because I wanted to figure out if this dog had a spiritual dimension to her. Dharma. The way that dog trots out the front door every morning, without a hat or an umbrella, without any money, or the keys to her doghouse, never fails to fill the saucer of my heart with milky admiration. Who provides a finer example of a life without encumbrance? Thoreau, in his curtainless hut, with a single plate, a single spoon? Gandhi, with his staff and his wire spectacles? Off she goes into the material world with nothing but her brown coat and her modest blue collar, following only her wet nose, the twin portals of her steady breathing, followed only by the plume of her tail. If only she did not shove the cat aside every morning and eat all his food. What a model of self-containment she would be. What a paragon of earthly detachment. If only she were not so eager for a rub behind the ears, so acrobatic in her welcomes. If only I were not her god. I'm going to give you the dog trifecta here, and then because I just wanted to make a point about, in telling younger writers perhaps that the presence of a dog might help you through the next stanza. It's also dangerous advice because, as you know, if you've ever tried to write about a house pet, a dog, cat, or even a goldfish that you are attached to, is a tricky business because you can easily get sentimental. And knowing that, and having written at least a dozen poems about dogs that are a little moist at the end, I set out to write a poem about a dog that was free of sentimentality, a kind of dry-eyed look at dogdom. And this, again, is spoken by a dog, and it's called the Revenant, and that is a ghost, the Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak, a trick you taught me, while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, the monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed, and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Thank you very much. That's it. No more dogs. Here's a poem. Not a new poem, but a poem that... I was visiting Tom Lux's house today and noticing he has this terrific book-lined, floor-to-ceiling, all-book, wallpapered with book room. And but I was thinking of a essay by Patrick Suskind, who had the experience of standing in his book-lined room and having two realizations. One, that he had spent most of his adult life devoted to consuming the contents of this book. And two, he remembered almost nothing about them. And that gave rise to this poem called Forgetfulness. Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if, one by one, the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago, you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away, a state flower perhaps, the address of an uncle, capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark, mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well, on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you so much. This is a poem that is sort of a kind of like the opposite of that poem. Instead of it being about someone who's forgetting everything, it's about someone who remembers everything in a rather unbelievable way. And it's called Nostalgia because it harkens back to the 20th century. It's sort of odd to refer to the 20th century as the past, but it's gone. You know, Goodbye, 20th century, whatever we got done. But in the 20th century, not in this century so far, but we had the habit of understanding the past by dividing it into little decade-sized, almost like bite-sized portions, and then adding a kind of personality to each decade. So we would refer very knowingly to, it was kind of a 60s thing, or she's kind of an 80s type girl, or a big refrain was, oh, don't be silly, come on, go ahead, it's the 90s, as if we just abandoned our morality for this decade. But we were always made to feel, I thought, kind of nostalgic about the passing of these decades as we sentimentalized them. And this poem is a reaction to that. That's why it's called Nostalgia. Nostalgia. Remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown. The color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon, and at night we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered back then, not like today. Where has the summer of 1572 gone? Brocade and sonnet marathons were the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another in cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor, we were all doing the struggle, while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. We borrowed the jargon of farriers for our slang. These days, language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. People would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what they saw in their journals without speaking. Our collars were high and our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to be alive, or even dead. I'm very fond of the period between 1815 and 1821. Europe trembled while we sat still, for our portraits, and I would like to return to 1901, if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps, or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month, when we picked berries and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Thanks. Thank you so much. I was just referring to this, these seasonal delights, that I kept missing. And this next poem is the occurrence of this phenomenon was a few months ago in, I would say, mid-July to late August. Is prime production time for lanyards, children making lanyards in camp. And that's when and production decreases dramatically until it picks up again next summer. Anyway, I was lucky enough to have a little book put out in Italy with this wonderful guy who translated my poems, and I went over there last year and gave a few readings in Italy, and my translator would translate, and he'd read the poem in Italian, I'd read the poem in English, and you don't realize what an American poet you are until you travel abroad and realize how much stuff the audience is really not getting. And I thought, well, lanyards that's an American thing, isn't it? And he reassured me that no, all over Europe, children make these things in the summertime, but they're not called lanyards, obviously. But throughout Europe, they're called Scooby-Doo. I don't know why, but I mean, it's Greece and France. There's one name for these things, Scooby-Doo. And so when he would translate, he would say, "Io faccio Scooby-Doo." And I would think, that's not the right tone I'm going for here. It just sounded really silly, but that's what they're called. So here's the here's the original English, the lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie, nibbled by a French novelist, could send one more suddenly into the past, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education, and here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the two-tone Lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. You have to decide. You have two choices. You can make a lanyard or a pot holder. I couldn't sleep all night. You know, I was such a conscientious kid. I was thinking, God, what if I screw it up? What if I make the wrong decision? You know, it was like two roads splitting in the woods. And I thought, the lanyard seemed to work out okay for me. So I don't think a poem called "The Pot Holder" would play that much. Nelson Algren said, "A little subject matter goes a long way," and he also said, "If you have a message, call Western Union." And there was a sense in poetry where subject matter, I mean, it's the poem is sort of the opposite of the essay. The essay, has to carry its subject matter throughout and be about something. Whereas the poem has the liberty of kind of using the subject as a kind of launching pad, or just getting rid of it altogether and drifting off into something. This is a poem, maybe I'll read two poems, about, written in a period when I had less than zero to say, but wanted to keep my status as a poet intact, so I continued to write. But my methodology was different. Instead of starting with some notion, I would start just by writing a little thing on a scrap of paper, a title, which I pretend that that's the title, and then I'd have to write the poem under it. This was one of those. The title is Hippos on Holiday. Hippos on Holiday. Hippos on Holiday is really not the title of a movie, but if it were, I would be sure to see it. I love their short legs and big heads, the whole hippo look. Hundreds of them would frolic in the mud of a wide, slow-moving river, and I would eat my popcorn in the dark of a neighborhood theater. When they opened their enormous mouths, lined with big stubby teeth, I would drink my enormous Coke. I would be both in my seat and in the water, playing with the hippos, which is the way it is with a truly great movie. Only a mean-spirited reviewer would ask, on holiday from what? So I'll read one more of that vintage, and this one's called "This Little Piggy Went to Market." This little piggy went to market is the usual thing to say when you begin pulling on the toes of a small child, and I have never had a problem with that. I could easily picture the piggy with his basket and his trotters kicking up the dust on an imaginary road. What always stopped me in my tracks was the middle toe. This little piggy ate roast beef. I mean, I enjoy a roast beef sandwich with lettuce and tomato and a dollop of horseradish, but I cannot see a pig ordering that in a delicatessen. I am probably being too literal-minded here. I am even wondering why it's called horseradish. I should just go along with the beautiful nonsense of the nursery, float downstream on its waters. I don't want to be the one to ruin the children's party by asking unnecessary questions about Puss in Boots or again the implications of a pig eating beef. By the way, I am completely down with going wee 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 all the way home, having done that many times and knowing exactly how it feels. Thank you so much. I'll be a little longer. Let's just see here. Oh, a poem. It's something about this kind of drift and not having much to say. Here's a poem where I, oddly enough, had something to say, and because I did, I wrote it in the form of a sonnet. And the sonnet is. It's a poem about the names of condo developments and gated communities. they seem to all have this, all the names seem to be very rustic, usually mentioning an animal like Beaver Glen or Deer Hollow and that kind of thing. Aren't these the exact animals that were driven out of this place to create these buildings? And the vanished. So the signs are like remnants of the animals dangling from a piece of wood. That's sort of sad. And the title is The Golden Years. The speaker is a retired guy, a widower. The Golden Years. All I do these drawn-out days is sit in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge, where there are no pheasants to be seen, and last time I looked, no ridge. I could drive over to Quail Falls and spend the day there playing bridge, but the lack of a falls and the absence of quail would only remind me of Pheasant Ridge. I know a widow at Fox Run, and another with a condo at Smoky Ledge. One of them smokes, and neither can run. So I'll stick to the pledge I made to Midge. Who frightened the fox and bulldozed the ledge? I asked in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge. Thanks a lot. This is a little poem where I think it's also about driving along the road there and seeing things. If it were not for my classical education, this would just be called Roadkill. But as it is, it's called Ave Atque Vale, which means hail and farewell. It means hello and goodbye. Ave Atque Vale. Even though I managed to swerve around the lump of groundhog lying on its back on the road, he traveled with me for miles, a quiet passenger who passed the time looking out the window, enjoying this new view of the woods he once hobbled around in, sleeping all day and foraging at night, rising sometimes to consult the wind with his snout. Last night, he must have wandered onto the road, hoping to slip behind the curtain of soft ferns on the other side. I see these forms every day, and always hope the next one up ahead is a shredded tire, a discarded brown coat. But there they are, assuming every imaginable pose for death's portrait. This one I speak of, for example, the one who rode with me for miles, reminded me of a small Roman citizen with his prosperous belly, his faint smile, and his one stiff forearm raised, as if he were still alive, still hailing Caesar. And this is a poem that I never want the reader to, I mean, sincerity was big back in the 1790s. Before that, sincerity was not really a value in poetry. No one cared if you really meant it, you know, until the Romantics. I mean, you would say, well, Alexander Pope kind of meant essay on man, but not in the same way that Wordsworth meant that the daffodils meant a lot to him. I'm not sure what that has to do with this poem, but the title is Fishing on the Susquehanna in July. I have never been fishing on the Susquehanna, or on any river for that matter, to be perfectly honest. Not in July, or any month, have I had the pleasure, if it is a pleasure, of fishing on the Susquehanna. I am more likely to be found in a quiet room, like this one, a painting of a woman on the wall, a bowl of tangerines on the table, trying to manufacture the sensation of fishing on the Susquehanna. There is little doubt that others have been fishing on the Susquehanna, rowing upstream in a wooden boat, sliding the oars under the water, then raising them to drip in the light. But the nearest I have ever come, the fishing on the Susquehanna, was one afternoon in a museum in Philadelphia, when I balanced a little egg of time in front of a painting in which that river curled around a bend under a blue cloud-ruffled sky, dense trees along the banks, and a fellow with a red bandana sitting in a small green flat-bottomed boat holding the thin whip of a pole. That is something I am unlikely ever to do, I remember saying to myself and the person next to me. Then I blinked and moved on to other American scenes of haystacks, water whitening over rocks, even one of a brown hare who seemed so wired with alertness, I imagined him springing right out of the frame. I'll read just a couple more. Thank you. Very good. A little poem. I love writing haiku, and I have a number of haiku. I was going to read this poem about haiku. I could read you a couple of haiku. I'll read you a couple of haiku. When I write them, I like to write them because I do make them 17 syllables. I find it pointless to abandon that simple rule, although a lot of American poets if it's 3 lines and there's a frog hopping around somewhere, it's called haiku. I don't see it. It's like a 19-line sonnet. I mean, no, it's not So, but I'll read a couple of those. We drank many cups of strong coffee, still no mention of the money. That's not like me and you, Tom. We got that straightened away right away. A snowplow scrapes by in the middle of the night. They predicted rain. The bird in the tree outside the bedroom, best companion for the sick. Moon in the window, the same as it was before there was a window. So many nicknames for you, but none as lovely as marijuana. And then just this last one here, this is rather emotional. Midwinter evening, alone at the sushi bar, just me and this eel. So I'll read just a couple more poems. But I'll read this poem. It's called Japan, and it's sort of a meditation on a real haiku. Japan. Today I passed the time reading a favorite haiku, saying the few words over and over. It feels like eating the same small, perfect grape again and again. I walk through the house reciting it and leave its letters falling through the air of every room. I stand by the big silence of the piano and say it. I say it in front of a painting of the sea. I tap out its rhythm on an empty shelf. I listen to myself saying it, then I say it without listening, then I hear it without saying it. And when the dog looks up at me, I kneel down on the floor and whisper it into each of his long white ears. It's the one about the 1-ton temple bell with the moth sleeping on its surface. And every time I say it, I feel the excruciating pressure of the moth on the surface of the iron bell. When I say it at the window, the bell is the world, and I am the moth resting there. When I say it into the mirror, I am the heavy bell, and the moth is life with its papery wings. And later, when I say it to you in the dark, you are the bell, and I am the tongue of the bell ringing you, and the moth has flown from its line and moves like a hinge in the air above our bed. I think I'll end. Well, first of all, thank you for being such a wonderful audience and so responsive. And again, I want to reiterate my pleasure at being part of this wonderful celebration of this great man who gave us this series. It's terrific to be able to contribute to that. And but I'll finish with a poem called Nightclub. It's a poem I like to end on. You only need to know one name in here, which I hope you know already. The name is Johnny Hartman, who was a jazz singer, you probably know. Died in the 70s, left us a terrific legacy of American standards, basically singing jazz ballads. And one famous and must-have album is his album that he recorded with John Coltrane playing saxophone along with him. Johnny Hartman. And the poem is called Nightclub. You are so beautiful, and I am a fool to be in love with you, is a theme that keeps coming up in songs and poems. There seems to be no room for variation. I have never heard anyone sing, I am so beautiful, and you are a fool to be in love with me, even though this notion has surely crossed the minds of women and men alike. You are so beautiful, too bad you're a fool is another one you don't hear. Or you are a fool to consider me beautiful. That one you will never hear, guaranteed. For no particular reason this afternoon, I'm listening to Johnny Hartman, whose dark voice can curl around the concepts of love, beauty, and foolishness like no one else's can. It feels like smoke curling up from a cigarette someone left burning on a baby grand piano around 3 o'clock in the morning. Smoke that billows up into the bright lights, while out there in the darkness, some of the beautiful fools have gathered around little tables to listen, some with their eyes closed, others leaning forward into the music as if it were holding them up, or just twirling the loose ice in a glass, slipping by degrees into a rhythmic dream. Yes, there is all this foolish beauty, born beyond midnight, that has no desire to go home, especially now, when everyone in the room is watching the large man with the tenor sax that hangs from his neck like a golden fish. He moves forward to the edge of the stage and hands the instrument down to me and nods that I should play. So I put the mouthpiece to my lips and blow into it with all my living breath. We are all so foolish. My long bebop solo begins by saying, so damn foolish, we have become beautiful without even knowing it. Thank you so much.